Chapter 6 of The Hunger Games opens right after the tributes parade has ended, and Katniss and Peeta and Effie and Haymitch are all on their way up to the District 12 lodgings within the training center. And the majority of this chapter focuses on the plot lines with Peeta and the Avox girl that Katniss meets while having dinner. But there are some key things that I want to note before we get to that. The walls of this elevator are made of crystal so that you can watch people on the ground shrink to ants as you shoot up into the air. The District 12 lodgings are in the penthouse of the training center, which means that the District 12 team always has to ride all the way up to the top of the training center in the elevator. But this isn't just any type of lift. This is a clear, see-through elevator. Even when the tributes are going up to their living quarters, even when they're officially done for the day, they are still always on show, always being watched by someone. Well, if you put enough pressure on coals, it turns to pearls. Effie beams at us so brilliantly that we have no choice but to respond enthusiastically to her cleverness, even though it's wrong. What Effie means here is that hardship and overcoming intense adversity can often lead to bringing out an inner beauty and strength. There is sometimes a nugget of good trapped within a lot of bad, and that if you put the bad through enough crap, that good will arise. But the metaphor is inherently flawed because it is fundamentally untrue, as Katniss later points out. Coal will not turn into pearls, no matter how much pressure you put on it, nor will it even turn into diamonds, which is another myth. This is just another example of the false beauty and strength that the capital purports. It does not matter if it's true as long as it shines. A girl sets a gorgeous looking cake on the table and deftly lights it. It blazes up and then the flames flicker around the edges a while until it finally goes out. Cinna specifically orders this cake in honor of Katniss and Peeta's costumes at the tributes parade. It's a really lovely touch from Cinna, but I do think that it is quite a little bit sad that Katniss and Peeta can have this moment of glory, of power, of finally having some hope that they might have a chance in these games if people will actually sponsor them, and all of this can be replicated in a cake. The capital citizens and the sponsors will gobble them up as much as they are about to gobble up this cake. At the end of the day, they are nothing more than things for consumption. Which again does link to the theme of food and overindulgence that I mentioned in the previous chapter. Whose idea was the hand-holding? Asks Haymitch. Cinna's, says Portia. Just the perfect touch of rebellion, says Haymitch. Very nice. Rebellion? I have to think about that a moment. But when I remember the other couples, standing stiffly apart, never touching or acknowledging each other, as if their fellow tribute did not exist, as if the games had already begun, I know what Haymitch means. Before the berries, before Rue, before Katniss fires the arrow at the judges, before anything outright rebellious happens, Katniss and Peeta have already set themselves apart in this regard. They held hands. They are not adversaries. They stand together in the one place where they must fight. Katniss does not just become the Mockingjay, she also becomes the girl on fire. It becomes a part of her symbol, a part of her branding that they use in the war effort. All of the propaganda and all of the fighting and all of the later rebellion, it all starts here with Cinna. And while they are all sat around for dinner, rehashing the events of the day and congratulating Katniss and Peeta on how well they presented themselves, Katniss recognizes one of the servers. And while Katniss is insisting that she recognizes the girl and knows her from somewhere, Effie is in turn insisting that that can be impossible because this girl that is serving them is an Avox. What's an Avox? I ask stupidly. Someone who committed a crime. They cut her tongue so she can't speak, says Haymitch. She's probably a traitor of some sort, not likely you'd know her. When looking at Avoxes, we have to remember how the capital, and specifically Snow, deals out punishments. There's something he says to Katniss at the end of Mockingjay, which is that he is never wasteful with a death. Everything has a meaning. Everything has a greater purpose. And there are a few major punishments that we come across when looking at the Hunger Games series, but there are two that stand out the most. The first one is that of which a victor endures when they start stepping out of line after the Hunger Games. Characters like Haymitch and Joanna have very similar stories in this regard. Both of their families were murdered because of it. And the other punishment that we know of is becoming an Avox. But these are two very particular punishments, each with a different purpose, because the perpetrator in one of them is the one that's being punished, and in the other, it's the perpetrator's loved ones. And I think that it all comes down to control with propaganda. The shining beacon of the Hunger Games is the victors. They're the reason that people keep watching. They like having a winner. They like people coming back for more. That is what Snow proclaimed in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. who will watch the games if there is no victor? And it's very likely that after the Hunger Games, victors feel that they have a right to a free life. Everything they have endured, everything they have gone through has given them this right, but that is not what they get. And a lot of victors will become agitated by this and angry and rebellious, and there has to be a way to control that, and controlling that specifically while keeping the message of the glory of the victors intact. It would do Snow no good to kill off all the victors. It would do him no good to cut off the tongues of all the victors, because he needs them to be able to proclaim the glory of the Hunger Games themselves. Would it be easier if he could just cut off their tongues and turn them into servants? Sure, but that won't work in order to keep the rest of Panem and the capital under the illusion that the Hunger Games are a good thing. Whereas when you look at the punishment that is dealt to an Avox, propaganda does not play a factor. These people are traitors who are spreading threatening stories about the capital to all of their peers and as many people as they can get to before trying to escape. But they're not known by the general world. They've not been upheld as a pillar of glory in the Hunger Games. Frankly, the majority of them have probably never been upheld as anything. But when trapped in a society that is ruled and controlled by fear and lies and propaganda, the way that you can feel power is often through truth and spreading that truth to others. And therefore, the ultimate punishment to really dampen down those truths is to cut out the tongues of the people trying to tell them. They physically do not have the freedom to speak anymore. They physically do not have the freedom to tell these lies anymore about the capital. It is incredibly dehumanizing and incredibly effective. And it's at this dinner table in front of everyone that is meant to help Katniss in the games, where Katniss defiantly declares that she knows this Avox girl, which likely means that the only way she could have known her is if Katniss herself may have been involved in rebel activities. I stammer and the wine is not helping. Peeta snaps his fingers. Deli Cartwright, that's who it is. I kept thinking she looked familiar as well, then I realized she's a dead ringer for Deli. Deli Cartwright is a pasty-faced lumpy girl with yellowish hair who looks about as much as I'll serve her as a beetle does a butterfly. Peeta, without any context whatsoever, saves Katniss from this awkward interaction, which, if we ignore who we know Peeta to actually be, can mean one of two things from Katniss's perspective right here. Either Katniss is correct about Peeta and he is saving her now so he can later hold it over her head, or so that he can tease more information out of her and then hold that over her head. Or he's actually just a really nice dude who saw that she was floundering and tried to save her. And then we get to the 6th Delort illustration. There is something so incredibly threatening about this illustration, despite it being in such a quaint situation. Everything about this image, everything about the composition, about the way the characters' eyelines are moving, point towards the Avox girl in the very center. Despite the fact that this girl has her head down so as to not be seen, despite the fact that she is so much smaller than the other characters, despite the fact that she seems to be making herself look as invisible as possible on the page, she is the focal point. We have 3 lights hanging down from the ceiling, almost as if they're interrogation lamps, almost as if she is genuinely being questioned, despite the fact that she cannot respond to anything they ask her. I also really like the way that Delort has composed this illustration based on the fact that the majority of the actual scene with the dinner table takes place in the bottom half of the illustration. The top half of this is just the room, but the walls rise up so high and the lights hang down so low, it almost feels as if the very room is pressing down on the Avox girl. There are numerous windows showing her outside, but she cannot escape, which parallels the fact that there are numerous truths that she probably knows but cannot communicate to anyone. All of these things that she can see but cannot reach. Another interesting point is that we can actually see all of the faces of the people on this page except for Katniss, who is turned away facing the Avox girl, which I think is a really good indication of the level of guilt and shame that she attributes to this memory. She is literally turning her face away from the viewer. This is just such an imposing and threatening image and such a quaint, almost inconsequential scene. I haven't said it explicitly, but I do think it should be said that Delort's use of composition is phenomenal in all of these images. And after this dinner, Peeta anticipates Katniss's concerns and eases her nerves by taking her up to a place where they can't be overheard, and he makes the conversation so that she doesn't feel she has to. From the branches hang hundreds of wind chimes, which account for the tinkling I heard. This is such a small thing, but I think that wind chimes are such a delicate, frivolous thing to have in a garden that they almost represent the fragility of the capital itself. Glass structures, am I right? But then Katniss begins to tell Peeta the story of how she interacted with the Avox girl. And Katniss explains to Peeta that it had been when her and Gale were hunting in the woods, and the girl and a boyfriend of hers appeared racing through, and they looked like they'd been running for a really long time. And soon a hovercraft appeared overhead and pierced a spear through the boy, killing him instantly, and captured the girl while she was screaming. And then we saw her. I'm sure it was the same girl. A boy was with her. Their clothes were tattered. They had dark circles under their eyes from no sleep. They were running as if their lives depended on it. Katniss and Peeta guessed that the two of them must have escaped from the capital because they had that capital look about them. When looking at the maps of Panem, the most accurate one that I think we've gotten is the one from the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that is used during the weather report. However, I don't think that there's ever been an actually accurate map done of Panem, even by the creators themselves. And if you look at Dove Makes on TikTok and on YouTube, she does an incredible series on this, on the geography of Panem, and how the maps that we have at the moment aren't actually accurate depictions of what America would look like after erosion and sea levels rise. But as it stands, these are the maps that we have currently, which means that the boy and the girl escaping the capital would have had to pass or cross at least 2 districts, likely through districts 9 and 3 if they wanted to avoid the military stronghold of District 2, which if I were escaping the capital, I would avoid at all costs. But the key point here is that they weren't caught until the outskirts of District 12. How were they missed? Were they being chased the entire time, or did they trip up and make a mistake right before they were apprehended? Is security bad in all of the districts? It calls into question not just why someone would flee the capital, but also how they managed to in the first place. It's the very fear that the propaganda the capital purports so often in itself a facade. And Peeta listens intently to this story, and he comforts Katniss in the best way that he can in the moment. Peeta takes off his jacket and wraps it around my shoulders. I start to take a step back, but then I let him, deciding for a moment to accept both his jacket and his kindness. A friend would do that, right? Katniss is in survival mode. She is trained to see everything as a threat to her safety. She's cold, sure, but there's something that she's marked as a threat coming closer to her, which is much worse. And so she plays the long game, not lashing out, accepting the jacket as one would a friend. It's strategy. Meanwhile, we don't know what is going on in Peeta's head. It could be something as simple as, oh, she's cold, let me offer her a jacket. He secures a button at my neck. This is very intimate and so sweet. But this is also proof that Katniss is not as in survival mode as her brain might tell her she is. Animals are trained to protect the most vulnerable parts of their bodies when they are being threatened. And for many animals, including humans, one of those parts is the neck. But here, Katniss again forgets the predator in her when Peeta provides comfort because she lets him constrict her neck. But Peeta could anticipate the wind, and he simply did not want her jacket to blow off. And then Peeta and Katniss start talking about more trivial things, including Katniss being discussed at the Malark dinner table. The idea that I might ever have been discussed around the dinner table at the bakery fire just in passing in Peeta's house gives me a start. The elusive impact the Everdeen women have on the Malark men. And if we take out of the equation the fact that Katniss's mother and Peeta's father knew each other, Katniss still was very much selling squirrels to this man for years and went to school with his son. It's likely that he would have discussed her. She was a relevant part to his life. And when Katniss gets back to her room, she sees the Avox girl once more, and she almost feels the need to apologize. But I know that my apology runs much deeper, that I'm ashamed I never tried to help her in the woods, that I let the capital kill the boy and mutilate her without lifting a finger, just like I was watching the games. The bystander effect. How complicit are we in crimes if we watch them and do nothing to prevent them or to help? How complicit is anyone just watching the games, or even taking part in them in minuscule ways? Who is more to blame, the head game maker or the rookie who's struggling to find work so they take a job as a constructor of the arena? Do they share equal blame because they both contribute? Katniss is many things, but she is not overall a dumb character. She must know deep down that if she tried to help the girl, she likely would have been killed as well, and likely her family punished even further. And yet she still carries that guilt with her, as if her actions could have had an impact on the girl's life. But it's because she did nothing that she'll never know for certain. If everyone is a bystander and everyone is complicit, then inevitably nothing will change, because the majority of people are led by fear and their own innate need to survive. So although Katniss is smart enough to know that her actions would have had little or even a worse impact if she did try to help the girl, she is also smart enough to know that by not helping, by not having any impact on the girl's life at all, then nothing will ever change. Perhaps the girl doesn't even remember me, but I know she does. You don't forget the face of the person who was your last hope. I pull the covers up over my head as if this will protect me from the red-headed girl who can't speak, but I feel her eyes staring at me, piercing through walls and doors and bedding. I wonder if she'll enjoy watching me die. This may all be true, but I do have to wonder whether or not the girl will actually enjoy watching Katniss die. It begs the question, does anyone actually enjoy the games? Because you can be fascinated by something that you don't actively enjoy. Is it just forced watching, or a blind curiosity and a wild fascination at what you're viewing? Do the people of the Capitol who seemingly enjoy watching the games actually know what true enjoyment is? Or have they conflated it too heavily with indulgence and amusement and spectacle and overall fascination? I think unfortunately the answer is that it doesn't matter if anyone enjoys watching the games, as long as they keep watching. That was chapter 6. Now we move on to chapter 7 and let the training begin.